Good day, everyone. I'm Dr. Gavino-Collins, and today I'll be talking about qualitative research. So, most of the scientific evidence we have are based on quantitative data, and these data have provided the foundation for our scientific knowledge. For most researchers, quantitative research is the preferred approach to answer a research question because data collection and analysis are clearly defined and specified, and the interpretation of the results are straightforward, so based on risk measures and statistical significance. So, why do qualitative research? Why do we choose to do a study that is based on subjectivity and even at risk for bias? Because the human experience, how we perceive and interpret them, cannot be understood and appreciated with numbers. So these experiences need to be discussed and probed in order to understand the hows and the whys behind these experiences. So in public health, feedback from the population on these experiences is an essential reference when monitoring and evaluating health service delivery or, for example, determining the impact of health policies and regulations, or determining the impact of disease or health determinant like socioeconomic status, for example, on a population. So these are information, excuse me, that cannot be fully understood unless the subjects are allowed to explain as fully as possible. So qualitative research is all about the meanings and interpretations of research subjects on their experiences, given the context of their respective situations. So according to Corti and Thompson, qualitative research aims to capture lived experiences of the social world and the meanings people give these experiences from their own perspective. So in the field of health, Baum argues that the value of qualitative research is that it offers insights into understanding and interpreting complexities of human behavior and their respective health issues. Gripdonk emphasizes the role of qualitative research in helping health professionals provide appropriate care because the evidence provided by this kind of research talks about the physical, emotional, psychological, even spiritual effects of illness on patients and their loved ones. So, information that cannot be culled from quantitative research. Specifically, Baum suggests that health related qualitative data can be used to explain the economic, political, social, and cultural factors that influence health and disease. So, to gain an understanding of how communities and individuals interpret health and disease, and to make sense of their illness experiences. Qualitative data can also provide an additional layer of understanding for results seen in epidemiological and clinical research. So, what then constitutes qualitative research? So, the study takes place in the natural environment of the subjects. It essentially focuses on the meanings and interpretations of the subjects based on the context that they live in. This might mean multiple realities are considered because of the personalized nature of these interpretations, which makes it possible to use multiple methods to interpret and analyze emerging themes. So, people who do this kind of research are open and willing to examine issues from the subject's perspective by interacting extensively with them in order to understand. So, research proponents are expected to be reflexive in their conduct and interpretation of the study. This is an essential and unique characteristic of qualitative research. So, reflexivity is the proponent's acknowledgement that their own personal experiences, perspectives, and even biases can affect their interpretation and understanding of their study data. But it is precisely because of this flexible and fluid nature of qualitative research that many practitioners of quantitative research question the validity of the former's results. Because the conduct of qualitative research is not as rigidly defined as it is in quantitative research. And because of this, there is a great challenge for practitioners of this type of research to observe and practice rigor. So rigor, as defined by Tobin and Bedgley, refers to how integrity and competence are demonstrated. So therefore, establishing the legitimacy of the research process and its results. So rigor reflects the quality of the research that is done, as well as a way of evaluating that research. So in quantitative research, this is defined as reliability and validity. Reliability is all about the consistency and trustworthiness of the data, whether the study can be reproduced and the same results will be achieved. Validity refers to whether or not the method used in the study actually measures or investigates what it is supposed to measure or investigate. Qualitative research, according to Johnson and Waterfield, is descriptive and unique to certain historical, social, and cultural contexts. So it is dependent on the reality that is socially constructed by its subjects, and this reality cannot be measured, but it can be interpreted. So Lincoln and Guba developed a criteria that translated traditional quantitative research concepts that can be applied to qualitative research. So internal validity to credibility, external validity to transferability, reliability to dependability, and objectivity to confirmability. So credibility is the equivalent of internal validity, and this is all about the authenticity of the information gathered from the subjects, basically answering the question, can the research findings be trusted? So it looks at whether there is an agreement between what the subjects say and how the researchers represented these viewpoints. The representation is considered adequate and accurate when the subjects are able to say that the description and interpretation made by the researchers are truly based on the information they gave. So transferability, as the equivalent of external validity, is all about the generalizability of the data that was gathered. So essentially, that the theoretical knowledge culled from the data can be applied to other similar populations, individuals, or situations. Dependability is all about the reliability of the data collected. So this can be guaranteed through the auditing process, meaning the research data is logical, traceable, and clearly documented. The data collection must be documented in detail in terms of the overall methodology and the methods of collecting them, and there should be a noted coherent linkage between the data and the reported findings based on the documentation. So confirmability refers to the objectivity or neutrality of the data collected. This is to show that the research findings and their interpretations are clearly linked with the available data and not a product of the researcher's imagination. So Lincoln and Guba says that this is the degree to which the findings are determined by the respondents and conditions of the inquiry and not by the biases, motivations, interests, or perspectives of the inquirer. So these are guiding principles that are meant to maintain rigor when doing qualitative research. So Coro Lundberg encourages qualitative researchers to engage in validation, continuous establishment, and questioning of the validity of their studies. Davis and Dodd advises that researchers consider rigor as attentiveness to research practice. And Hess, Bieber, and Levy suggests that validity is a process whereby the researcher earns the confidence of the reader that he or she have gotten it right. So there are two sets of strategies that I will be talking about that focuses on maintaining rigor within the research process. So the first is on the research design and its processes, and the second is on the research participants and the researchers. Strategies that are used for the research design and processes are the following. So methodological choices refers to the framework that is used in doing the study. So the choice of framework should be appropriate in answering the research objectives, how data will be collected and analyzed. So this choice needs to be made clear to the audience of the research. According to Thorne, by presenting a detailed design logic description, the readers of the research will be made aware that the investigators are aware of the implications of the chosen methodology. Prolonged engagement and fieldwork helps to reduce bias in the research. So this allows for the investigators to spend a significant amount of time with the study subjects, which allows for a trusting relationship to develop, thus helping to decrease both the motive and opportunity for deception in the subjects. So although this strategy is actually more feasible in frameworks using ethnography and participatory action research, primarily because of the need to have a lived experience with the study subjects in order to understand their culture and practices. Now, if an in-depth interview is used as the data collection methodology, a series of interviews may also simulate this strategy. So a rich and thick description is basically a detailed accounting of the research settings, the study subjects or participants, and the methods and processes used in the study. So this means that the researchers are expected to keep journals or notes that provide detailed descriptions of everything that took place during the data collection process. So it allows the audience of the research to determine the reliability of the data and the extent of the generalizability of the study findings to other settings. So interpretation and evidence is all about the researcher's responsibility to provide the evidence to support their interpretation of the data. This is usually the use of verbatim quotations from the participants, which reveals how meanings are expressed in their own words rather than the researchers. This is also where having detailed notes will be most useful because they aren't just references for these quotations, but they are also the physical evidence of the raw data used in the study. Reflexivity is the researcher's acknowledgement that their perspectives, beliefs, and experiences play a key role in how they interpret and analyze their data, that they consider these as resources rather than a source of bias or error. So by combining these with critical self-reflection, reflexivity establishes the integrity and critical abilities of the researcher. But these personal and intellectual biases must be made explicit in the study in order to assure the audience of the research that the data interpretation is valid and grounded within the data. Now, triangulation is meant to strengthen the credibility of the data because this refers to the convergence of information from multiple sources in order to support the data and the evolving themes in the study. Triangulation offers depth, breadth, and complexity to the data, as well as rigor when it comes to analyzing and interpreting that data. It exposes different perspectives of reality, and if different sources give consistent results, this strengthens the internal validity of the study. Now, there are 4 kinds of triangulation that may be used. Methodological triangulation is when there are multiple methods used to collect data. Multiple methods provide depth to the data, and if similar findings are revealed using different methods, this again enhances the validity of the data. This could be using different data collection techniques, for example, individual interviews, focus group discussions, and surveys to get the same information from the population. Theoretical triangulation refers to the use of 2 different theoretical frameworks to examine the same research question or to interpret research findings. So, for example, using ethnography and participatory action research to talk about the use of medicinal herbs in an indigenous or tribal community. You're asking this tribal community to talk about their experiences with using medicinal herbs, what prompted them to do this, why they do it, but also using the lens of the collective experience of the community with this practice to reinforce the ethnographic data. So, data or source triangulation refers to the use of multiple quotations to highlight emerging themes of interest, using multiple participants or locations for data collection. Researcher triangulation is when more than one researcher provides observations or analysis on the same research situation. So, this usually happens when there is a research team involved in the study. So, the different members of the team reinforce each other's findings, thus strengthening the validity of the data. So, this is also an advantage because the different perspectives can enrich the entire process of data collection and analysis. Interdisciplinary triangulation refers to the use of multiple disciplines in one research project to deepen and broaden the quality of data that's collected. So, for example, a study looking at health seeking behaviors by single moms in an urban poor community can include doctors, nurses, midwives, social workers, even development aid workers. And they will all contribute their findings on these behaviors based on their respective professional perspectives. So, convergent or congruent findings occur when two or more sources present with similar results and therefore validate one another. So, a complementary finding is when the combination of different findings provide a more complete picture of the phenomena or the experience or the event. So, dissonant findings are when two or more methods or data sources produce incompatible results. So, meaning they neither support nor validate each other. So, in a situation like this, the research proponents have the option of investigating why there is dissonance in the data and where this is coming from in the study population. So, dissonance doesn't automatically mean there's something wrong with the data. It could be because these differences reflect underlying problems in the subject's dynamics with one another. Or it could be a reflection of the mix of subjects in the study, that they have pronounced differences in demographics or root cause of the event or experience, thus creating differences in interpretation or understanding of the experience or event. Nevertheless, the bottom line of dissonant data is an opportunity for the research proponents to do a deeper dive in finding out why this is so. So, strategies that are used for research participants and peer researchers are as follows. So, member checking, which is also known as participant validation. So, this is meant to establish the credibility of the collected data by allowing the research participants to review the data that was collected and allows the researchers to seek clarification in order for them to do a more accurate analysis. So, participants are able to review the transcripts, delete information, and give further comments. So, this essentially helps to validate the researchers' interpretive processing of the data. So, peer review, which is also known as peer or expert checking. So, a peer or colleague who is an expert in qualitative data analysis, who is not involved directly in the research, analytically reviews field notes and transcripts in order to validate or question the findings of the study and link it with the themes, categories, and or codes that the researcher arrived at. So this helps reduce researcher bias. Peer review, though, is not an attempt to get a second opinion, nor does it represent a standard by which the study findings are compared. It is simply meant to have a fresher pair of eyes or even an objective perspective looking at the data in order to assure that the data is valid and its collection was done within the right parameters. So, an audit trail is sometimes referred to as a decision trail, and it is crucial for establishing the confirmability of the findings of the research. It provides a detailed clarification of the theoretical, methodological, and analytic choices that were made in the study. thus enhancing the reliability and or dependability of the findings. Now, this is similar to the strategy of maintaining a rich and detailed description. But an audit trail is not just about the data collection process, but it involves the entire research process. And as mentioned previously, using a diary or a journal to document the entire research process from the inception of the study all throughout the data collection, the specific steps involved in analysis and interpretation and discussion of the data. An audit trail may not be appropriate for all qualitative studies, especially if it's just a short study, but for studies that cover a prolonged period of time or working with a big number of subjects or subjects that may be of significant interest, for example, refugees, political activists, people with disabilities, or who are gender diverse, these studies might spark interest in other researchers to use them as references or jump off points for further studies. These kinds of studies require an audit trail. Now, there are 6 theoretical and methodological frameworks that are used in qualitative research. So, these frameworks provide guidance on how the study is carried out and the principles that underpin how the data is understood and interpreted. So, ethnography essentially looks at how people perceive their experiences according to the cultural context they belong to. So, Daly says that if we wish to understand the nature of being human, we must understand humans as they are embedded in culture. It underscores cultural relativism, which affirms that cultures must be understood within their own social and cultural contexts and not be judged by the beliefs and values of others. So, through prolonged and extensive engagement with study participants, they are able to express their values, beliefs, and actions in and through culture. And this allows the study proponents to discover stories, patterns of living, and cultural themes. So, phenomenology is the most commonly used framework in qualitative research. So, it aims to generate knowledge about how individuals experience things in relation to a particular experience or phenomenon. So, again, according to Daly, it is supposed to understand and describe the participants' experiences of their everyday world as they see it. So, an important requirement of this framework is that researchers suspend any prejudgments so that they'll be able to understand the experience as the participants see it. So, because the framework's aim is to find out how people understand the experience or phenomena being studied, this can be used to study a wide and varied selection of topics, from looking at COVID related experiences to mental health issues around domestic violence and gender, or even how commercial sex workers observe safety in their work. So, participatory action research is a community based research and therefore looks at the collective experience of a population. So, a special feature of this framework is the participation of the community in developing what information will be collected, how it will be collected and analyzed, and finally, how the information will be disseminated. So, one objective used in this framework is helping the community address an issue it is facing. And this framework helps to mobilize the community to work towards that goal, at the same time empowering them because they play an active role in achieving that goal. Participatory action research is the narrative that shares the community's experience with the process they used, the strengths and weaknesses they uncovered, and the interventions that have worked. Now, grounded theory aims to understand a social phenomenon by systematically collecting and analyzing data and putting aside any preconceived bias about the phenomenon being studied. So the goal is to create a new theory about the social phenomenon by using inductive reasoning based on the data that was collected. It is a repetitive process of collecting data, forming concepts and categories, and creating relationships from these categories until a theory takes shape. This framework always involves work over a significant amount of time, and successful undertakings contribute to new perspectives in the discipline where it's being used. So, grounded theory can be used to study approaches in treatment in psychology, sociological studies, attitudes to public health interventions, among other topics in the social and empirical sciences. So, a case study is an in depth study of a unit of concern, which can be an individual, a family, a community, an organization, an event. Basically, the researcher's preferred unit that they would like to study in detail within its natural setting. So, which gives the research proponent the opportunity to observe how that unit functions in its natural states. So, case studies can either be descriptive, explanatory, or exploratory. Descriptive case studies aim to describe a phenomenon in detail within its real world context. It is usually used in sociology and anthropology, and explanatory studies, on the other hand, look for causal factors in order to explain a phenomenon. And its main objective is to identify the underlying hows and whys associated with the occurrence of a phenomenon. Exploratory case studies, on the other hand, are done to study or explore a phenomenon with the aim of identifying new research questions that can be used in other new studies. So, symbolic interactionism looks at the subjective meaning individuals give their activities and their environments. So, this is based on the premise that individuals construct perceptions and meanings as a result of their interactions with other people. So, according to Willis, symbolic interactionism studies human interaction. That interaction is based on how humans interpret the world. So it is symbolic meaning rather than concrete meaning that is most important. So this framework puts emphasis on the essence of meaning and interpretation as important human processes. These meanings that individuals attribute their experiences become their reality. So Bloomer states that there are three premises of symbolic interactionist approach. First is that human beings act toward things on the basis of the meanings that the things have for them. So, second is that the meaning of such things is derived from or arises out of the social interaction that one has with one's fellows. And third is that these meanings are handled in and modified through an interpretive process used by that person in dealing with the things he or she encounters. So, hermeneutics, as defined by Patton, is a framework for interpretive understanding or meaning with special attention to context and original purpose. So, the meaning that is attributed to something depends on the cultural context where it was created, and at the same time within the cultural context where it is interpreted. So, there are two features distinct for this framework. So, one, language is the essence of understanding, and two, the historical context is an important frame for understanding. So, the text or what is said by the participant about the phenomenon is scrutinized in order to reveal what it actually means for the participant. The data collection for this framework is quite distinct because its foundation is in the written text. So, diaries, journals, reports, and published materials, among others, and on top of doing in-depth interviews to collect these stories. So feminist methodology obviously focuses on the female experience. The ultimate aim of this framework is to capture the female lived experience in a respectful manner that legitimizes the female voice as a source of knowledge. Now, this knowledge is meant to explore, challenge, resist, and change social and sexual inequalities. This framework strongly advocates reflexivity. It involves not just thinking but also feeling, and research proponents are encouraged to incorporate personal and research experience in the data collection and analysis. So finally, the postmodernism framework rejects the idea that there is a single reality or truth. Rather, there are many realities and truths. It deconstructs meanings that study participants have about their experiences and the language that they use. So it claims that all social, cultural, and historical knowledge are created according to the contexts rather that are influenced by gender, race, and class. So therefore, it is dynamic and can hold multiple realities. So we've completed the whole data collection process, transcribed our interviews, and have accumulated massive amounts of raw data. What then do we do? So as Gibbs puts it, the aim of data analysis is to transform all the information, all the raw data that we have into something that is clear, understandable, insightful, and hopefully the information will also be trustworthy and a true reflection of the event or phenomenon that we just studied. So the choice of what data analysis approach we want to use is arbitrary and may depend on what information we're looking for in our study or with what lens we prefer to interpret our data. But here's the kicker. So data analysis in qualitative research begins not at the end of the data collection process, but it starts as soon as data collection starts, and you have raw data coming in, and it is an ongoing process until all of that data has been collected. So why is this so? Because when we analyze qualitative data, there is the continuous process of reviewing, interpreting, and understanding. And somewhere within those steps, we may uncover new information that will change our initial interpretation and understanding of the data. So this enriches the knowledge that we gain from our study, and it deepens our understanding and appreciation of the information we have. And the starting point of all this analysis is our coding process. So coding is when we organize our data in a way that allows us to see patterns, where we can start to develop themes, and from there be able to interpret and understand the data. So Flick gives us a list of basic questions that can be used to guide in the coding process. We can look for what is it that concerns the participants, what is it about the event that stands out or that is highlighted by them. There may be events or occurrences that are of greater significance or value. In what way are they considered significant or insignificant by the participants? We can look at the interpersonal dynamics or relationships that have created impact and who were involved. Orientation of the information to time, place, and course, or the severity or intensity of an issue, for example, may be what is highlighted by the participants in their interviews. So if there is something specific in the data that keeps coming up, why is this so? And is this being done intentionally by the participants? So these questions are meant to guide and focus how the data is put together. So these are the basic coding steps. And as I've mentioned earlier, Coding must commence as soon as data collection starts, and when the initial raw data comes in, it is transcribed and read through without any interpretation. So you go through this initial set of information just so you have an idea what is it that the participants are saying about the phenomenon or event that you're studying. Once that is done, then you read through them again, this time being mindful of any observations or even categories of information that you may pick up. So for these two steps, it is recommended that whoever did the initial read through of a document or transcription should also be the same one who will do the second reading, so that it's easier to pick up significant information that may pop out. When there are several researchers going through documents and transcriptions, this will be a good time to start creating an index of terms, so that if you are picking up similar observations, you can just group them together, and this will make data interpretation and identification of codes easier. So once you have all the codes written down, review them and see if there is cohesion among them. If they're able to come together to present a common theme or themes, for example, or if there is a narrative that is starting to come out that answers your research question. You might want to see if these codes and themes can be linked with certain theories that can help support your findings. So these theories will be very helpful when you start to make a discussion to explain why and how your study findings are what they are. So in the beginning of your analysis, don't worry if it seems you have way too many codes to work with. As all your data comes in and your data collection gets completed, you will have a better picture of what kind of codes will emerge, and this is when you can start grouping similar codes together. You can also review your data and see if they can be coded differently so that you can whittle down the codes you have. It is at this point when you should consider doing peer review. So aside from having a more objective pair of eyes reviewing your codes and data, this pair or pairs of eyes also give you a fresher perspective that can screen, add, or filter the codes and data that you have. So beyond the coding process, there are several ways of analyzing data that influences how the data is interpreted or perceived. So content analysis is the simplest way of doing this and primarily involves determining the frequencies of themes or patterns. So this is done so that you can rapidly see what kind of information you have, and this allows you to verify your hypothesis at the same time protecting your data from bias because the quantification supports your finding. So when doing this kind of analysis, you must know at the onset what you want to look for in the data you're analyzing. So this facilitates the counting process when you want to identify what are the emerging themes or patterns, and this is generally practiced in content analysis. So this kind of analysis is useful when looking at the patterns and trends of words, their frequency and relationships in textual data like newspapers and magazines or policy documents, for example. The information you get will let you know how social concepts, for example, are described and understood. So here we have an example of a study that used content analysis. So this table is some of the categories and frequencies that were identified by Shug and Liam Putong in a study that they did in 2002 to examine how the media portray women's health issues in Australian society. So by going through two Melbourne-based newspapers and looking at their women's health articles, you can see that children and motherhood are the predominant issues that come up, followed by pregnancy, sexual violence, IVF, and breast cancer. We can surmise from this data that at the time this was collected, The Australian media looked at motherhood and pregnancy as health issues, which is kind of interesting because when you think about it, these are actually normal and natural events in a woman's life. So, in this list, the true health issues are IVF and breast cancer, which were seen only 7 and 4% of the time, respectively. So, just a quick review, these are the basic steps when you do content analysis. So, make sure you know at the onset what data or information you want to look for before you start the analysis. So, these are your categories that you work with. So, in Shug and Liam Putong's study, you saw in the table what categories they were looking for in relation to women's health issues. You then choose the sample that you want to study and categorize. If we go back to Shug and Liam Putong's study as an example, the sample that they studied were the Melbourne-based newspapers. And then finally, record or count the number of times these categories occur in your sample. So, thematic analysis is the method of choice for identifying, analyzing, and reporting themes or patterns in the data. So, this is done by searching across a data set to find repeated patterns of meaning using initial and eggshell coding. So, eggshell coding allows researchers to connect the different codes that were identified in the initial coding. So it's a way of organizing the data together by making connections among the categories, and this allows the researchers to find themes that emerge in the data. So because of this, thematic analysis is perceived as a foundational method in qualitative analysis. So recognizing patterns and themes is a common feature in the different analytical approaches. So when doing thematic analysis, so Braun and Clark proposes that you have to be familiar with the data you're working with. Familiarity allows you to easily identify patterns and therefore helps to generate initial codes, which can then be used to identify tentative themes. So when you review and refine the themes to see if they actually fit in the codes and the entire data set, you might need to revise them as needed. So this is also when you start to gather a thematic map of your analysis. So how these themes might relate to each other. So that's your map. So once you've revised your themes, you can then finally define and name them. Now, narrative analysis looks at analyzing the study participants' stories and retelling them in a framework that will make sense to the audience of the study. And part of this retelling is identifying and examining key elements like time, place, plot, and scene. So when the narrative is rewritten, it is done so chronologically, and it is this time element that differentiates narrative analysis with other types of data analysis. But it is the responsibility of the researchers to identify causal links between the ideas during the rewriting process. So the element of chronology in the storytelling means there is a beginning, a middle, and an end, or even a past, present, and or a future to the narrative. So of course, as with any interesting narrative, there are other elements that come out like protagonists of the story, struggles or conflicts, and the storyline allows for a three-dimensional narrative to develop. So you look at the personal and social aspects of the story, which refer to the interactions going on in and among the key players in the story. So the past, present, and future aspects present a continuity of the story, backward and forward projections whose links are identified by the researchers as they work their way through the data. And the place is the situation where the narrative takes place. What is the context that drives the narrative? So Gibbs offers these steps in doing a narrative analysis. So familiarize yourself with the content and structure of the narratives. So this is a deep dive into the stories that the participants tell so that you can identify experiences, images, meanings, accounts, and explanations of events that are found in them. So this familiarization is the key to identifying causal links in the stories. So afterwards, you write a short summary of the key elements in the narrative, identifying the beginning, the middle, and the ending. So in the process, you may be able to identify thematic ideas and structural points in the story. So in what parts of the story do the participants talk about their actions, the choices that they've made, that may have led to certain consequences and outcomes that are significant points in the narrative? Are there interruptions or discontinuities in the narrative that contradict the themes that you've identified? So, what is the emotive language that the participants used? Did they use any metaphors or imagery to express their feelings? Why did they feel that way? So, as all of this information come out, then you can start coding themes and develop a coding frame. Now, the coding frame may include broad themes like childhood, adulthood, marriage, or a professional career. So, these themes also give us a general idea of what part of the narrative are we looking at. At this point, you can connect these themes in the narrative with those found in literature and theories, or doing case-by-case comparisons to see if there are any common points or differences with the participants' experiences and those that have gone through similar experiences. So when we do a discourse analysis, so we explore the relationship between discourse and reality. Now, discourse involves the communication of an interrelated set of texts or ideas that bring concepts into being. So, how that communication happens, how it's disseminated and understood and received by its audience. That is what brings these concepts to life and makes them real, thus creating social reality as we know it. And when people interact with each other, these interactions are anchored within the social reality created by these discourses. So, an example I can think of is how TikTok has transformed how information is passed on to the point that even individuals who may not be qualified to talk about certain things can actually come across as knowledgeable or even experts in these things by simply being confident and emphatic enough to go on TikTok to talk about them. And because they come across as legitimate, TikTok just continues to circulate that information around. Now, this is where the discussion around the role and value of language in reflecting and describing the world comes in. Because one of the central themes in discourse analysis is that discourse and language are the production of social reality. And discourse not only describes reality but also creates it. So, trying to unpack all of these takes a lot of work and effort. But in the end, doing discourse analysis allows us to explore how socially produced ideas that populate the world were created in the first place and how they are maintained and held in place over time. So, for those who choose to do discourse analysis, Gail has outlined these steps. So, recorded verbatim talk should be transcribed as is and should not be summarized. This data is reviewed, and in the process, as the research proponent, one must be mindful of one's own assumptions that can influence how the data is interpreted. So, be inclusive when coding the data. Even if the ideas do not agree with you, but you know that it is there, then they should be coded accordingly. Now, revise your research question as patterns in the data emerge and continue to analyze the data by examining regularity and variability in it. So, those who do discourse analysis say that this is an interpretation that warrants detailed argument and attention to the material being studied, and therefore must not be ignored. So with the information at hand, you can now formulate a tentative hypothesis. But reliability and validity of this information or data must be checked by doing a deviant case analysis, analysis of coherence, and checking for participants' understanding of this data if it came from face-to-face conversations. Now, semiotics is the study of signs and sign systems and what they mean. Therefore, semiotic analysis is about attempting to reveal the processes involved in creating meaning and how signs are designed so that they are understood and used by their target audience. So it attempts to explore the deeper meaning of data to uncover how meaning is formed through a process of connotation. So in doing so, it aims to find any themes that may have been removed or repressed by other themes and is concerned with uncovering the hidden meanings within texts. So an assumption that implied meanings exist. But ultimately, what it does is it challenges you to explore alternative ways of interpreting. So Daly and colleagues suggest asking the following questions when doing a semiotic analysis. Now, if you notice, these questions are looking for answers that do not necessarily exist in the data at hand, but assumes that there are more information that can be found if you try to dig some more into that data. And when you do find that data, to find out why they were not there in the raw data in the first place. So finally, we need to talk about computer-assisted data analysis, the top three of which are your Atlas.T, your MaxQDA, and the most popular one of these, NVivo. Now, these computer programs are used to collate and organize data in order to make the analysis process easier and more accurate. But they are not used to do data analysis. It is still the researcher who will transcribe the interviews, identify codes and themes, and interpret and analyze the information that is there. So the features listed here are the ones that are commonly seen in these computer programs. Now, at the end of the day, when you're working with a large chunk of raw data, having a program that can organize it for you so that it's faster to identify codes and themes is a big help and also helps reduce mistakes and data loss. So in summary, qualitative research allows us to study non-quantifiable data like behavior, feelings, perceptions, experiences, and they provide information that contributes to a greater understanding of a population or an event or a phenomenon. Now, there are various ways of observing rigor in the research process in order to maintain the validity of the results of the study. You have frameworks that provide guidance on how to approach the research process, depending on what kind of information the research proponent would like to get. And when you do data analysis, this allows the research proponents to generate useful information from the study that is viewed through the lens of how that information will be understood. And so that ends my lecture on quantitative research. Thank you very much for your kind attention and good day to everyone. Thank you.